what I suggest we're looking at is a simulation that has multiple levels. It has this level we call the human world, and then it has other levels which are beyond human sight. And there people talk in the esoteric world about the astral dimension. If you don't want people to grasp the nature of the reality that they're experiencing, then you don't teach it in the area the population has
That's
access
right.
to. So you want them to believe that there is this world and this world only. I mean, you get religious people to believe there's another
Right.
world. Basically, this physical world is all there is. So at that point, any idea of something beyond the world of the seen, which is what? Beyond the world of the five senses,
Mm-hmm.
is madness and can't exist. So when people talk about other, because the five senses demand that those senses are stimulated
Mm-hmm.
before they will believe anything.
That's right.
Right? So they say, well, I've never seen a reptilian.
Right.
Right, yeah. But by the way, you are looking and perceiving visual reality with a band of frequency so small, it's hysterical.
It's hystericals, right?
Right? So you can't see, because anything beyond that frequency band, although it exists, you can't see it.
Right.
And if you demand that only if I can see it, touch it, taste it, etc., you're going to believe in it, then you're only going to believe in what happens in the narrow band of frequency. You're not going to perceive the possibility of anything going on beyond it. So that's what this cult has done in terms of programming the population.
Welcome to Far Out with Faust, everybody. I am Faust Chicho, and today I am thrilled and honored to be joined by the one and only David Icke. Let me tell you about David, in case you haven't been paying any attention in the last 30 years. David, he is the conspiracy realist. He's dedicated his last 30 years of his life to meticulously investigating, researching, questioning, and documenting, uncovering who and what is actually controlling this world. A little bit backstory for David. He was a famous football player in the UK, soccer for the Americans listening. And his career was cut short by arthritis, but he then pursued a career in journalism and found himself back in the spotlight as a presenter with the BBC of all places. He dabbled in mainstream politics. He was a spokesman for the Green Party, but his life would change forever in 1991 when he experienced what is commonly described as at least on my show, a Kundalini awakening, a spiritual awakening. Since that time, David has authored over 20 books, spoken in over 25 countries. His research and subsequent revelations into prominent political figures, influential families, global events, of course, has made him a target of some criticism, naturally. But if we've learned and confirmed anything over the last 3 years, we know that it's the elites and their lapdogs don't censor people who are peddling lies. They don't waste their time. David's books have been incredibly consistent and wonderful in a great many ways. Not only his accurate predictions of the global events that we're seeing unfold before our eyes, but his promotion of expanded consciousness, mindfulness, peace, and unity have resonated with millions of people all over the globe. If you want to get to know him more, if I've sparked your interest beyond this podcast, he's got an incredible documentary called Renegade, the life story of David Icke. And he's got a series on Gaia, which I've watched twice, called Escape the Matrix. I highly recommend either of them. I'm so sorry for the long-winded introduction, my friend, but you earned it. David, welcome. Thank you so much for beaming into the show.
Thanks, mate.
Oh my God. So I was trying to figure out the best place to start, but I that moment that you had, with Betty Shine always kind of comes back, because that was kind of a big turning point in your life. Why don't we start there and give everyone a quick, if you can, idea of what was going on in your life when you met her?
Well, I was a television presenter with the BBC, and I was a national spokesman for the British Green Party at the time. And I had this very strange experience throughout 1989, going into 1990. And that was whenever I was in a room alone, it didn't feel like I was alone. There seemed to be a presence there. And I'd not had a life experience before that that put me in those situations, what people wrongly called paranormal. Um, and so it was all a bit strange to me. And it went on throughout 1989 until March of 1990, when I'm in a hotel room working for the BBC. I've just come back from the BBC television studios, and I sat on the side of the bed because the presence in the room was so obvious, so tangible. And I spoke out into the room, empty room as it appeared to be, and I said, "Would you please contact me if there's anybody there, because you're driving me up the wall." And a few days later, it was only a few days, I was just down the road from where I'm sitting now, at a railway station where there was a cafe and a news shop and sold a few books. And I was with my son Gareth, who's now, of course, a big strapping lad. He's only a little boy then. And I got stopped by a railway worker who wanted to talk to me about football, soccer. There was a big game on that day, as I remember. And when we finished chatting, I couldn't see where Gareth was. So I went into the news shop where I know he would be, reading the books on steam trains, which we both like. And there he was. And I stood at the entrance at the door, and I said, "Gaz, we'll go and get some lunch." So, and I turned to go, but my feet wouldn't move. And what had happened was the atmosphere around me had changed. What I would now say was an electromagnetic field. I had no idea what was going on at the time. And I heard this, not a voice, it was a very strong thought form went through my head, not generated by me, certainly consciously. And it said, "Go and look at the books on the far side." So I'm in the land of the bewildered then, and I start walking towards. It's the only, my feet can now walk once I've started moving towards the books. And I was bewildered too, because I knew that news shop still there. They sold a very few books, and they were overwhelmingly romantic novels, which the tourists, it's a seaside resort, by to read in the deck chairs on the beach. And so I thought, what am I going over here? All the books. But in among the books was this this book called Mind to Mind by Betty Shine, who I didn't know anything about. But it was different to the other books. So I picked it up and I turned it over and I saw the blurb. And it talked about a psychic. I thought, psychic? This lady's a psychic that's written this book. And it was basically an autobiography. So I bought the book and I read it in 24 hours. I found it fascinating. And then I contacted her and I went to see her maybe a week later, 2 weeks later, in a house not far from Brighton on the south coast of England. And I was on my way to present a program for the BBC. I went via her house. And so a couple of visits, and it was just a chat. And then on the third visit, again, I was going up to present a program with the BBC. And I was sitting there on this medical type bench in her front room, and she was doing the hands healing next to my left knee. And suddenly I felt like a spider's web had gone on my face. And it hit me immediately, because in her book, she'd said when other levels of reality are trying to lock into you, you sometimes feel like a spider's web on your face, because that's, of course, another electromagnetic field. And I said nothing to her, but she, about 15 seconds later, reeled her head back and said, "My God, this is powerful. I've got to close my eyes for this one." And I'm sitting there completely, what the hell is going on? I'd never been in a situation before. And she started telling me what they were telling her to tell me, which was I was going to go on a world stage and reveal great secrets, that I would have information put directly into my mind, and other times I would be led to knowledge. and many, many, many other things, all of which have turned out to be true. And I mean, the thing about knowledge in my mind, when I first started this journey after that encounter, that experience, and lots of things happened in my life immediately afterwards, like I left the BBC or the BBC left me. And it was very synchronistic the way it all happened. And in the first maybe couple of years, I would be led to knowledge, and that's gone on since, but it's like you would bump into people, you'd have personal experiences, you'd walk into books or documents or different sources of information, but they were all about the same thing. They were all pushing you in the same direction. And so for the first couple of years, I would look at the information that was synchronistically coming into my life, and I would then conclude from that information what I thought was going on. But after about a couple of years, that really switched and has stayed like it ever since. And that's, I would know what was going on, and then the names, dates, places, detail would come after that.
Yeah.
So that thing about we'll put knowledge into his mind, directly into his mind, and other times will lead him to knowledge has all kind of happened. And, you know, I couldn't put together the vast swathe of interconnected information that I have if I was doing it purely from my conscious mind and purely from my own initiative, if you like. You couldn't put that together in that period or anything close to it. So what's been happening is this synchronicity in my life, which was going on before I now realized, but became conscious after the Better Shine experience, was basically giving me the puzzle pieces. And I was putting the puzzle pieces together. And as you do when you're putting a jigsaw puzzle together, the more pieces you put in, the more you can see what the picture is. So you put the later pieces in even quicker. And so that's basically what's happened. And, you know, there is despite the appearances, I do understand why, of what's happening in the world now, the direction that we're heading, there is a force that is seeking to break this dismantling of human society to the point of preventing what is planned for humanity from happening. And to do that, what is required is for people to, first of all, tune into that level of awareness, and then do what we feel to do as a result of that connection. And that means an end to complaining about things and saying, oh, it's terrible what they're doing, and oh, I know what they're going to do next, and that's fine, but there also has to be a response, not a response that fights the enemy, but a response that ceases to cooperate with our own enslavement. Because there's 8 billion people being enslaved, basically, and a relative handful of people behind it doing it. And it can only happen if we cooperate with it. You know, and we've seen many examples in the last 2 years, 2.5 years.
My God.
Of what happens if you just do what you're told without question and don't
have
any self-respect to say, hey, you know, am I being told the truth here? And should I actually be doing what they're telling me to do? If you don't do that, then you get what we had, which was global fascism, which is designed to be permanent eventually. And then you had the other people, myself included, who said, hold on, I'm going to start looking at what you're telling me is happening, and I'm going to see if it stands up. And, you know, I know from decades of experience of investigating what authority tells us to believe, and it is invariably a load of old nonsense. It's either 100% nonsense or it's manipulated nonsense, where they tell you enough things that are true to pull you in, and then they twist it So they take you off in the wrong direction of basically.
Oh, they're masters at that. They sprinkle just enough truth in with their bullshit, you know.
I call it gin and tonic with a twist, you know. Give you enough. See, the disinformation for anyone who's in any way streetwise cannot be, well, it can be for the population. We saw that, but for you know, mass of the population. But anyone who's in any way awake on the most basic level, you can't give them 100% false information,
right?
Because they'll start to realize it's false information. What you give them is enough to pull them in, and then twist it. And you're quite right. They're masters at that. And there's a reason for this. And it's that what we perceive this world to be, which is an external reality of physicality, is actually the figment of our, not the figment of our imagination in and of itself, but the figment of our manipulated imagination. We're being fed a fake reality in the form of energetic waveform information, just like Wi-Fi. And like the computer, we are decoding that into a completely different form on the screen of the computer in this case, but in the human case, in our heads. We are like computer terminals, in effect, that are turning this wave field information into the form that we perceive as an external world. And if you do that without being yourself conscious of the fact that that's happening, or at least conscious of something greater, if you're only operating on the level of the five senses, the body senses, then you are pretty much literally a computer.
Yeah.
What you're doing is you're taking this information, you're processing it through the five senses, and how we do that, we can get into maybe, and you're turning it into a reality. You are not impacting upon that reality. That reality is impacting on you. You literally, I call them press enter people. But what happens if you become conscious, as we all can, and we all should be, and we all are beyond the illusion? You become conscious beyond the five senses. The more conscious beyond the five senses you become, you start to override the program.
Yes.
And suddenly you start to develop a questioning, yes, but also a uniqueness. You start to express the uniqueness, because we all may be a point of attention, as I call it, within an infinite state of awareness, but we are a unique point of attention. We are uniquely individual as well as all connected. And that uniqueness starts to come out as you start to override the program. If you don't override the program, then you're just like everyone else.
Yeah.
And you know, just very quickly, I think one of the things that's been a prime motive of this that they've manipulated and lied to people to have is to manipulate that disconnection between expanded awareness, what people might call soul, and the five senses that interact with this reality directly.
And I think that they of course they understand full well the proclivity for humans to want to strive towards this, you know, this greater feeling and this camaraderie with their human family, and they prey on that. You know, that's what all the, you know, keep your grandmother safe. That's what all the messaging comes from. All the virtue signaling, as it's the kind of the pop culture name for this, comes from their full understanding of the fact that human beings do strive for this. You know, we're wired for it. But what happens is we lose our, unfortunately, we lose touch with our, you know, the most important sense, our sixth sense, you know, and we get enamored with the five senses, and the five senses are great, especially if you like ice cream and you like to play sports, and it's amazing, but by far that is not what reality is. And yet we're in a society that is continually reinforcing and conditioning that that's all it is, right? And that goes back to Darwin, I think, and I wanted to ask,
that Darwin a whole belief system was to tell you that you are only your five senses. There is nothing else. It's just that's what you are. And overwhelmingly, that is the perception that drives mainstream science. You have quantum physics, but most other disciplines, they have to acknowledge quantum physics because it exists, but they crack on in their own discipline as if it doesn't exist. They go on, everything, medicine, everything is based on an absolute illusion that's not real. Like we live in a solid world, a solid reality. We have a solid body. It's like if you believe that the computer is real in terms of it's you, then you're going to get caught in believing absolute nonsense. But when you can see, actually, this is me and this is the computer, this is what taps me into the internet, but I am something else. Once you start to believe that you are the computer and there's no division, that's an important point, because that's exactly where we're being taken. We're being taken down a road increasingly quickly and Elon Musk is involved in all this. People like Ray Kurzweil at Google are involved in all this. All the Silicon Valley giants are involved in this. Zuckerberg with his metaverse,
Meta, yeah.
Yeah, they are seeking to obscure the line where the computer ends and we start. So they're drawing us into cyberspace. So cyberspace becomes increasingly our reality. And every time you self-identify with this cyber world, not that, like I say, you are consciousness having a human experience, and you are interacting with the computer and you're going on the internet, but it's the internet. This is a computer. Do you know it's not you? So you have this sense of where the divisions lie. But what they're doing is they're pulling people more and more into the computer cyberspace world, starting off with the smartphones, then the technology that goes on your body, the wearables, and now increasingly what they call implantables, and these headsets which take you into this metaverse reality. And what it's doing all the time, if you look at it, and I go into this in the books in detail, they have to, those, and we can discuss who they are, but those that are seeking to enslave humanity in totality, even down to what we think, they have to prevent us from tapping into expanded levels of awareness. Because once you do, you see it. You see it. You don't see dots anymore that appear to be random. You see the pattern. You see the picture. You see what's going on, and you are able to then override this program, this computer program that we call the body, and impact upon it. But if you don't, the program runs you. And that's why most people tend to not live life, but have life live them, because the program is driving their life, right. It's driving their decisions, it's driving their
they're a reaction, which is exactly how they want things. They're not in a creator state, they're in a reactive state.
But where I was going to go with this is, as more and more people are awakening, as you well know, the effort is to push people more and more and more away from that and into the myopia of the cyberspace reality.
Mm-hmm.
And another aspect of this is, because it's all about self-identity in the end, control of self-identity. It's control of perception and control of self-identity. What we perceive, that dictates how we behave. So if you get what people perceive, you get how they behave. But also, it's self-identity. If I'm self-identifying as consciousness, having a human experience, then that taps me into that level of awareness that is beyond the illusion. So I can see the illusion because I'm actually looking at it from one point in my consciousness, from beyond the illusion. I'm in the world, but I'm not of the world. And the idea is to manipulate humans so they become in the world and of the world. That's why they want us in this 5-sense state. So the more myopic our self-identity can be manipulated to be, the further we're going to withdraw from the true self into what I call the phantom self, the human self as an I rather than as an experience of the true I. And so this woke whole agenda, where you have these letters getting longer and longer all the time, LGBT, on and on and on it goes.
Yeah.
What it's doing, if you look at it from the perspective that we're talking about, is it's focusing self-identity into smaller and smaller and smaller perceptions of self. So now you've got, you say to someone, even, years ago, who are you? They'd say, I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm from this religion, I have this income, I do this job, and so on. I come from this city or wherever. And they would be your labels of a human life. But they're still labels. They're still not who you are. They're still only experiences that your consciousness is having briefly. But what they're doing now is so making myopic the self-identity of people, especially the young who are being prepared for what's coming, that people self-identify the I, who they are, with their preferred sexuality. And so people's sense of self is being manipulated to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And if you then start putting these headsets on, and what are they doing? These headsets, they are, especially if you do the most sophisticated of these virtual reality technologies, where you wear the gloves which give you the touch sense,
right,
and the audio and the sight sense, the headset. What is that doing? It's hacking into the 5 senses. It's hacking into the 5 senses to override the world the 5 senses would normally decode into a sense of reality. And I've said this, I've just got a new book out called The Trap, in which go deeper in the rabbit hole than I've ever been. But I said in that book, if you were in the womb with a headset on, and you come out into the world still with a headset on, and you go through your life and you don't lose the headset until the end, then what are you going to do? You're going to believe that what that headset is feeding you in terms of information and reality is real. That's what you're going to believe. Of course you are.
Absolutely.
And you see with these virtual reality games where people put the headsets on, and maybe they're in a room like this, and they put it on, and suddenly they're thrashing around. There's nothing going on in the room.
Right. No.
They're thrashing around because the information being fed to their brain is overriding this reality. And so it's
we know the mind can't tell the difference. The mind has it's difficult to perceive the difference. And if you look at it, you'll see it's firing in much the same way what if that was happening in real life. So, it's a literal jacking.
The metaverse, the pulling you further into cyberspace, is to what they call it. You have an avatar. Well, let's have a look at that. This is an avatar, if you like. It's a
Mhm.
vehicle for consciousness to experience this reality, which is a very narrow band of frequency. But then you go and you have an avatar to go into the metaverse. So now you are an avatar within an avatar. Now you're in a maze. Now you're in another maze, and the idea is that people eventually lose their entire sense of reality. You know, in an expanded state of reality, you can look at your human experience and you can see it for what it is, a brief human experience in a tiny band of frequency we call the human world. And then we move on. But then if you're body centric, five sense centric, well, that's all gone. That sense of perspective has gone. Now it's the five senses that are dictating your reality in interaction with this human world, as we call it. Then you go into the metaverse, and now your sense of reality is a maze within a maze. So the idea is you're going to completely lose a sense of the I, and once you lose the sense of the I, you lose you, and that's what we're doing. You know, consciousness in its expanded state would look at the human world and go,
My
oh
God.
my God.
You know,
But to the five sense level of perception, the craziness, the idiocy, the extraordinary stupidity that goes on in this world is perfectly normal.
right.
Why,
That's
why wouldn't you drop bombs on this country? And why wouldn't they drop bombs on you? I mean, consciousness is going, oh my God, what are you
right.
doing?
This is what we know. This is what we're taught. And that's, and that's one of the reasons why I think that they needed Darwin. Well, they needed to take what Darwin was doing and really make it their own, was to create a world where they could be a part of, a world they could rule, really, for lack of a better way to describe what has gone on. Because this notion of survival of the fittest and dog eat dog and shit on you for me to get what I want, that is the belief system they needed installed in the human consciousness in order to come to the power that they we would eventually see them come to. And I know that's shaking loose now, thanks to a lot of awakening. And it's like you always say, they have to stick their head up eventually, and recent events have caused them to do that on a larger scale than ever before. And you're going to continue to see that. The question is, how many people will be awake enough when they do to say, wait a minute. If 99 people don't want war, how do we continuously have and find a way to go to war? What is going on? If everyone wants peace, why is it so elusive? Well, that's a great question, and you answer that question over and over in your books, to the point where I got to stop buying highlighters. I keep going using them up and throwing them out and getting a new one. But my God, do you bring the details and the evidence, the documentation together for anyone to see? If you want to see exactly how we got to where we are, it's all in David's books. I can't recommend them enough. And context is everything. Yeah, man, I kept bringing this word up, when the quote pandemic hit. I said, can we have a little context here? And people were like, take your context and shove it. Everyone is in this panic survival mode, and I'm like, but wait a minute, how can we know anything if we don't have context? And that's another thing that it's a gift you have, bringing light to context, and why the key to why it's so important to understand context. Because if you're looking at things, like you said, in isolation, it's impossible to see the bigger picture. You use a wonderful, I think it's a metaphor about the postage stamp. I love that metaphor you use.
You look at the postage stamp consensus, as I call it. So what we have within this human world is two worlds, actually, operating side by side. One is hidden and one is seen. The one that's hidden is a global network of secret societies with an interlocking leadership, central mission control leadership. And that network I call the global cult. what that does, I mean, why are secret societies secret? To keep secrets from the population. So they pass on at the inner core, not Bill and Joe down the Freemasons Lodge. They at the inner core, they pass on information they do not want the public to know, because if they did know, the world would be different. So there's two main channels of this information. One is where the world is being taken and who's taken them there. And the second one, crucially, is the nature of reality, the nature of the I, the nature of this reality that we're experiencing. They do not want us to know that. They don't want us to know that actually reality is not physical and solid and immovable. It's actually very malleable if you reach a level of awareness where you can see how it works. So that's passed over through the secret society network. And this secret society network has created, not least through the Rockefellers in America, J.D. Rockefeller, etc., the education system. It has created and owns the global mainstream media. It owns governments. It owns the World Health Organization. It created Silicon Valley. Mm-hmm. It created Facebook and Google, which owns YouTube, and so on and so forth. So what all those things have in common is information. And what does information do? It forms our perception. So here, information is passed over of the high level knowledge of reality and the plan for humanity. And in the other world, the human world, they've created the sources of information which feed to the population. And that is very different to this. That's telling you this world is solid, that scientists know what they're doing just because they're scientists. The doctors know
doctors too, yeah.
They're doctors. Therefore, if a scientist tells you something, you've got to believe it, or you're crazy. Or a doctor says this, well, you can't go against that because he's a doctor or she's a doctor. They must know what they're doing. And they've set up the governments and the education system. And so this is how it works. The idea is to squeeze as much as possible the information, thus perception of reality, that the population has access to. So you come out of the womb and immediately your parents are influencing your sense of reality. The parents that have been through the process you're about to go through and been programmed by it overwhelmingly, not always, but overwhelmingly. You then come out into the world, and in, 3-4 years now, you're in a school, you're sitting at a desk, and an authority figure representing the state is telling you what is, what isn't, what is real, what isn't real, what has happened, what hasn't happened, what's possible, what's not possible. They're telling you when you have to be there, when you can leave, when you can talk, when you can eat, when you can go to the toilet. Your whole environment is controlled, and you've only just arrived in the world. And the teacher representing the state, because they teach what the state tells them they're going to teach, is the authority figure and the arbiter of all knowledge, etc. Now, if you have that situation over and over from the earliest age, two things can happen and do happen. One is you start to learn very early on that if you question or disobey authority, there are consequences. Now, this is working to get you into, as an adult, someone who acquiesces by reflex action.
Conditioning, yeah.
And the other part of it is you see authority or an authority figure as the arbiter of knowledge. And so this goes on through your school life and into university. And this is where the postage stamp consensus comes in. It's this narrow band of information, sense of the possible, that is taught. It's not just taught in the schools and the universities. it's underpinned by the 24-hour media that are taking the postage stamp consensus as the foundation for how they report the world. And then at the end of the your education period, you go out into the world of work, and now you're meeting people overwhelmingly who've been through the same process you've been through and bought it and believed in it. And so now you're in the world of work with people who've been through what you've just been through only earlier, and everyone's confirming to everyone else that what they've been told is true, this postage stamp consensus. So everybody knows that, mate. That's the line. And then this postage stamp is then defended by those who've been programmed to believe in it, by their reaction to anyone that wants to step off the postage stamp and say, actually, I'm going to look over here to see if this makes sense. And that's when you get the black sheep, the people who are targeted for being crazy or being dangerous and all that stuff, or being mad because they've stepped off the postage stamp and they've thought, whoa, there's more to know than they've been telling me.
So much more.
You know, and I would say this to people on the postage stamp. According to mainstream science, the electromagnetic spectrum is about 0.005% of what exists in the universe in terms of energy in all its forms. Some say it's as high as 0.5, but it's tiny, whatever. And so if you look at visible light, which is the only band of frequency that we can actually see, it is a fraction of the 0.005%. So if we're going to have a starting point, it's what was said by Socrates in ancient Greece, or reported to have said anyway, wisdom is knowing how little we know. So from that perspective, you know, there's one thing that you always know and can never be wrong about. Whatever you know, there's always
more to know. Yes.
So, but what the postage stamp is saying is, this is all you need to know. And if you go exploring beyond that, then you're in trouble. And so this cult has created a structure in which not only does does a human life proceed through this program to the graveyard, but that the target population has formed within it people who program the program.
That's right.
People who program the program. That's what we call teachers. That's what we call academics. That's what we call doctors. It's what we call journalists. What we call politicians. These are all people. I mean, some of them, in terms of politicians and others, the inner core will be connected to this cult and will know what's happening here. But most of them won't. It's done like this, and the California law they're bringing in, which says, to doctors, if you question the official, you can be struck off. That is an extreme, or not even extreme anymore. It's more becoming right. The way things are going. But it's a wonderful example of how this structure works. So you're a teacher, yeah. Do you want to program these kids to believe what the state wants them to believe so that they'll be limited their entire life? And most people, most teachers, not all of them mind,
right,
will say, no, I don't want to do that.
Right.
Okay, so why are you doing it? Oh, well, because if I want to be a teacher, I've got to teach this curriculum in a particular way. And if I don't, then I'm out.
Right.
So, Doctor, why have you been giving this, knowing the dangers of doing so? I mean, the figures show it massively.
Clearly. Yeah.
Why are you doing that? Well, because if I don't do it, I won't be able to be a doctor anymore.
Yeah.
So this is how this works. It's set up this structure where it enslaves the programmers just as it enslaves those being
That's right.
programmed. And the antidote to it is simply saying no.
No.
It's simply refusing to cooperate. And to do that, first of all, you've got to let go of the fear of consequences for doing what you know to be right. This is one of the great foundations of it, and how it manages to proceed. And it's that people, instead of doing what they know to be right as a first, second, and last, I'm doing what I know to be right, irrespective of the consequences. You know, you're telling me to think of consequences. Well, hold on. That means I am going to conceive the possibility that because of those consequences, I'm not going to do what I know to be right. Expanded consciousness will never do that.
Right.
Consciousness in fear will do that.
Right.
Because what it says is, yeah, but what's best for me? What's in it for me, or whatever. And it's this this fear of consequences that makes you serve the system, which is actually not just enslaving you, it's enslaving your kids and your grandkids. And it's just this point of reaching a point of consciousness where you say, no, I'm not doing this to these kids. I'm not doing this to these patients. I'm not doing what I know to be wrong. I'm only going to do what I know to be right. And if there are consequences for that, well, there'll have to be consequences. Because the point is, unless we start doing what we know to be right, the lack of which is how we got into this mess,
right,
where we're being taken is going to reach its end point.
That's right.
People think it's scary now. They want to have a look at where this is meant to go.
Yeah.
So this is a pivotal point where people's not just desire, but total determination.
That's it.
To do what they know to be right.
That's what it's going to take.
That's what it's going to do to bring this house of cards down.
I mean, and enough of us have to decide, because, and you know, it's part of the conditioning, is that they count on the fact that most people will look to others. And, you know, unfortunately, this has become the way it is. We look to government to take care of us. You know, you look too often towards that, and you're going to find yourself in a bad situation. And that's where America is, unfortunately, you know, the ringleader in this in a lot of ways. Of course, you know, our origins come from Europe, but it's, you know, they're partners in crime. And what I always try to
borders, really. There are no borders. They're
no, not for them. But you know, it's like that old lesson in school. You know, you learn quickly that if somebody gives you a crack, then if you give them a crack back, you're the one that's going to get in trouble. You know, and what I see happening so much is, and what I've realized really in the last couple months, really reading all your work, is, you know, even people who can perceive the retaliation, you know, do you see what they did? You know, did you see what Germany was doing? Did you see what this country is doing? Oh, Putin is doing this. He's so evil. But that what they don't see is the provocation. They don't see the initial, you know, the thing that started it all. And that is by design. And if people, and you said this in one of your books, you said, you know, if the German soldiers realized that they were being used and manipulated, they would have never went along with it. Just like the American soldiers, and would have never went along with it. If they had realized that they were being played as far back as, you know, World War II and even World War I, was orchestrated and provoked and put into motion in so many ways. And this is what people can't comprehend, you know, for a lot of reasons, but which, you know, the information for them to understand exactly how that has gone on literally is there, and it's in your books, and you've spent your life putting it together. So if you want to understand the world and what's happening right now in Ukraine with NATO and Russia, what has gone on, you know, every calamity, every catastrophic war has been by design. It could have never gone on without that design. And you know, I'm grateful for your incredible body of work and dedication, because you know, I am much more enlightened as to the way that these things work, the bigger picture of you know.
It's a simple question. Is Putin fighting this war in Ukraine? No. Is Zelensky, the so-called Ukrainian leader, is he fighting the war in Ukraine? No. Is Biden, who talks about we are not going to do this, we will do that. Has he ever, is he fighting the war? No. None of them are. None of the European leaders that are taking action, which is fueling the fire of this conflict, which is all designed to happen, are fighting the war. The population is fighting the war, and the population is suffering the consequences of other members of the population fighting the war. If anyone cared about the people of Ukraine, and you know, you kind of indicated it earlier, it's what they're doing. They work the emotions. They're brilliant at working the emotions. So they have an emotional response instead of a cold thinking, calculated
Critical,
thinking
yeah.
response above emotion. Because they want the emotion, because that scrambles the mind and stops critical thinking. So the emotional thing with Ukraine is the Putin's bombing these innocent Ukrainians. Okay, but like you say, and I was pointing this out long before.
Yes, you were.
The NATO countries, or the NATO, which is a cult operation. NATO, it's run by this cult. That's why it doesn't work for the benefit of people and the population. It works for the benefit of this cult. And they were poking Putin and Russia in the chest
over and
year
over,
after year after year after year. And then when Ukraine started, or Zelensky, who's just a puppet of the US, which is a puppet of the cult, says, "Oh, we want to join NATO," and then people like Kamala Harris, who I'm going to brain cell to rub together, after Ukraine before this started, and said, "You know, we're sympathetic of Ukraine joining NATO," and of course the Russians are saying, "Well, that's a red line for us."
Yeah,
Ukraine joining NATO, and so the whole thing then kicks off. But what I was saying is, if people really cared about the people of Ukraine, they would be working and pressing 24 hours a day to get both groups around the table to stop the violence. That's what they would do.
That's
but
right.
Instead of that, they're fueling more and more and escalating it, because the war is what they want. Peace is what they don't want.
Right.
And you know, we can get into why that is. It's a deep esoteric foundation to all this, because keep coming back to this cult, this world of the cult. They understand what reality is. They understand how it works. They understand how psychology works. This is what is passed on through the generations of the cult. The ever more accumulated knowledge of how the psyche works, how emotions work, and how reality works. And so they know that this is actually a simulation. It's a fake reality that we're experiencing. It's the incredibly advanced equivalent of having a headset on. And you know, if we go deeper into this, where this is all coming from, I got so much, of course, ridicule in the 1990s when I first came out and said, actually, behind all this is a non-human force. And I talked about reptilians and other non-human expressions and entities. But the point is that you've got to go beyond form to find the real point of where this is coming from. So, you know, it doesn't matter if you've got a reptilian body or a human body or a gray body. It doesn't matter. What's driving your behavior is your state of consciousness.
Yes.
So in the end, whether this control system plays out through non-human species into the human world, in the end, it's a state of consciousness that's driving it. Bill Gates does what he does because of his state of consciousness.
That's right.
and other people do what they do because they have a different state of consciousness to Bill Gates. It's all consciousness in the end.
Yes.
And what I suggest we're looking at is a simulation that has multiple levels. It has this level we call the human world, and then it has other levels which are beyond human sight. And you know, there people talk in the esoteric world about the astral dimension, and you know, again, we come back to this postage stamp consensus. If you don't want people to grasp the nature of the reality that they're experiencing, then you don't teach it in the area the population has access to. So you want them to believe that there is this world and this world only. I mean, you get religious people to believe there's another world. Basically, this physical world is all there is. So at that point, any idea of something beyond the world of the seen, which is what? Beyond the world of the five senses, is madness and can't exist. So when people talk about other, because the five senses demand that those senses are stimulated before they will believe anything.
That's right.
Right. So they say, well, I've never seen a reptilian.
Right.
Right. Yeah. But by the way, you are looking and perceiving visual reality with a band of frequency so small, it's hysterical.
It's hysterical, right?
So you can't see, because anything beyond that frequency band, although it exists, you can't see it.
Right.
And if you demand that only if I can see it, touch it, taste it, etc., you're going to believe in it, then you're only going to believe in what happens in the narrow band of frequency. You're not going to perceive the possibility of anything going on beyond it. So that's what this cult has done in terms of programming the population.
Yes.
So what we have is this astral dimension, or lower fourth dimension, or lower astral, lower fourth dimension that people talk about. And it's not kind of up there. When people talk about, you know, heaven or the realities, they look up, you know, I'm going to heaven. Well, no, it's not like that. It's like radio and television stations in the analog system sharing the same space. So we're on this television channel, and that's what we're aware of. But all the other channels, realities, are sharing the same space we are without interfering with us, because they're on a completely different wavelength. But this lower level of this astral dimension, or fourth dimension, comes very, very close to our reality, and in fact can interact with it. And that's where this non-human force operates from. Ultimately, it's a state of consciousness. And this has been described by ancient cultures all over the world in their different ways. They've had different names for these entities, they've had different names for the consciousness, but they're telling the same story. And so what you have is this lower fourth dimension, by its very nature, is a low frequency state. And to control humanity, we have to be kept within that low frequency state. Because once you expand your awareness, you're through that into a high expanded frequency state, and you can then see and perceive, hear what this force doesn't want you to see.
Right.
So what they're doing is, if people imagine like a bubble around this simulation as a bubble, and there's different levels of it, including the level we call the human physical world. But to keep you in that bubble, so that even when you leave the body, you're still in the simulation, in the matrix, you're in other levels of it. To keep you in that bubble and stop you getting through and out into the great infinite beyond, they have to hold you in a certain low vibrational state. And that vibrational state that we generate, that we become, comes from our perceptions, and it comes from self-identity. So you start to get deeper into why they are obsessed with controlling our sense of self and controlling our perception. They want us in this low frequency state because then we can't literally.
And it's a survive. It's the reptilian part of your brain. It's not a coincidence. There are no coincidences, but it's not oh, isn't that weird? That's also the part of the brain that we call the reptile brain. It's the survival part of the brain. It's the reason why there is periodic blunt force trauma inflicted by these call on humanity. 9/11, JFK. It has to be done in order to keep people living in fear. This is part of the vibration that they need to maintain, because if people stop and there is a sense of peace, and I mean, there's a reason why they don't teach meditation in school. They do not want, all the studies that have come from meditation and mindfulness would indicate that if you want a peaceful society, then really all you need to do is teach your children to be mindful and spend some time of the day in reflection and meditation. And you have this ripple, the Maharishi effect that happens, with that is measurable, literally. But they don't do that because they don't want that, that would be a simple thing to do. And so it just amazes me that people kind of, they take what you have said, and because they've been so conditioned to believe that this world is limited to this hysterical, minuscule perception that we can perceive with the eyes and the five senses, and they dismiss what you're saying because of it. It boggles my mind, because those are the same people who I notice over and over have no mindfulness. They have not plugged in at all to anything other than the five senses. And so it's easy for them to hurl, insults at people who think and see things that they don't, and I think part of them is subconsciously extremely frustrated with their existence because they can't see it. And I think part of them wants to, part of them needs to. Anyway, that's my
that's absolutely right. And when you quieten the mind and you get one step back from the five senses, then your consciousness can start to expand. It can go where what it chooses to go. What the five senses are always doing is reacting and telling your perception where it needs to go. Whereas when you're just in a quiet space, I spend like 90% of my day daydreaming. I don't meditate as such, but I daydream, which is just letting my mind go where it wants to go. Because what they want you is constantly in the five senses. So you're reacting all the time to five sense stimuli. And therefore, the reptilian brain becomes very, very important to that, because it's a survival mechanism. Well, it is in a way, but I think it's there actually because the survival mentality gives this non-human force everything it wants.
Mm-hmm.
Like road rage comes from the reptilian brain, and the reptilian brain doesn't think, it reacts. That's why it can kick in before the thinking mind, the thinking brain can have a say in what happens. That's why when people react and then they go, oh my God, what was I doing? Or that's the best one. Oh my God, what was I thinking? Well,
you weren't thinking. That's right.
Reacting. That's the reptilian brain. This is road rage and all of it, like I say. If you look at it also, the symbolism of the Matrix movies, where it was in that brainstem area that the probe went in, which took people into the Matrix. And that's another point about that symbolism. When you had the Matrix characters, your Neos and your Morpheus characters outside the Matrix, they were in the ship outside the Matrix, outside the simulation, simulated illusion. But they didn't go into the illusion with their body. They went into it through their mind. It was their mind, that was the connection symbolically in the movies, that took their mind into the simulation. We are in here with our mind. That's the whole point. And if our mind can be manipulated to perceive what the Matrix is feeding us, then we will create it.
That's right.
We will create it. It'll be because we're literally processing information through the mind to create this reality. And
that's the loop. That's the creative loop that we all have, as little individuations and children of the Creator. We are made in its image, right? And it is a creative force. And so that loop, yeah.
Great example is the computer. Okay, there's not Wi-Fi in this room, but if there was, then where is it? I can't see it. The Wi-Fi, it's a field, it's a radiation field of information, fantastic amounts of information. And the computer tunes in, connects with that field of information, which we can't see, and puts it in a totally different state to what it is in the Wi-Fi field on the screen. So suddenly you ask people, describe the internet to me, they'll say it's moving pictures and graphics and words and what have you. And okay, yeah, but only on the screen. That's the only place it exists in that form. Everywhere else, it's a Wi-Fi field and electronic circuits and what have you, but it's the only place the internet exists on the screen in that form is on the screen, right? Mm-hmm. And it's the same with us. The only place this world exists is in the decoded regions of the brain that decode waveform information, electrical information into electromagnetic information into the world that we think we are perceiving. We perceive it to be outside of us, and that's what it seems like, but actually it's inside of us.
Right.
So if I'm operating this computer, my state of consciousness, my perceptions, my self-identity is deciding where on the Wi-Fi field I'm going to go, what I'm going to take out of the Wi-Fi field and turn into a reality on the screen. Am I going to go to TikTok? Am I going to go to a news site? Am I going to go here? My consciousness, my perception, my self-identity is deciding that. And what I found fascinating, the more I've got into this, is how this technological world that's unfolding so fast is simply technologically mimicking the reality and how we perceive and create the reality we actually do. It's overriding it. It's like the headset. The headset is mimicking how we create reality through the five senses, because, the five senses do what? They turn waveform information, wave field information, into electrical information, which is then communicated to the brain that turns it into digital holographic information, which is the world that we perceive to be outside of us when it's not. And so everything, even me communicating with you now, it's all vibration. That is vibrational information that is decoded into all the different elements of what we call human life. So my vocal cords are generating a frequency field called speech, but it's not speech when it leaves my mouth. It's a vibrational field, and then the receiver picks up that vibrational field, turns it into electrical information, which is fed to the brain, and then the brain decodes it into whatever the person is being told. And so you all the five senses work like this. So they now have a pain relief system where they seek to stop the message coming from the point of impact, the pain, to the brain. Because if that message is broken, the message is not received by the brain, right. And the brain does not decode that into ouch, that bloody hurts. It doesn't do it. And so everything's going on in here, everything's leading here. And this, what we call the heart, consciousness, can override that system. It can override it. That's where it's really coming from, to override the program. Because without that expanded awareness overriding the program just drives you. You think, oh, I've had this thought. Well, have you? Oh, I'm feeling like this. Well, are you? Are you, the true I, feeling that? Or is it the program feeding that in response to a situation it's been programmed to respond to in a certain way? I found it interesting as I traveled all around the world for decades, all over the world, country after country after country. It didn't matter what the culture was, it didn't matter what the language was or anything. People tended to respond in the same way to the same stimuli.
Hmm.
And it's because there's this programming level where the body is literally a computer.
Yeah.
It's a biological computer and it's responding to program. But when you open this and you expand your awareness, you start to override the program and you start to do things differently to what the program will do. And then you start to stand out.
Then you start walking around the matrix like Neo. Then things start to change for you. You know?
Exactly. You start to realize that the world of I can't is actually the world of I can. But we have to be programmed to believe we live in a world of I can't, so that we won't.
Right.
And therefore, unravel this this perceptual program that people are subjected to. So it's the individuals, the maverick people who are spontaneous and don't immediately react like other people, don't accept things without question.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones that are overriding the program. And those that don't override the program, what the program's driving them. They may think they're making decisions and feeling things. It's the program that they're responding to, not the consciousness which has been shut out. It's like if you can I put it? Okay, if I look at my finger now and I really focus on my finger, all peripheral vision has disappeared, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is the five senses. They want you to so focus on the five senses that all peripheral vision, other levels of consciousness, get shut out.
And the longer you do, the harder it is to reconcile what is actually going on, you know. And then you hear people like us having this conversation, and you know, the part of you, you know, I think there's just like this. There's a disconnect that happens, but that's because of all the, you know, if the foundation isn't there. And that's what, when I hear you talk about, you know, people are set free, one of the first things that happens is that this has to open. The heart has to open. And that sounds new age and it sounds woo woo, but the heart has a mind of its own. Literally, it has neurons, you know, a lot of them actually. So does the gut, but that's another podcast. But in order for people to start to ascertain greater truths, I've always been, and this has been my experience as well, you know, my quest when I started, I didn't even know it was, but I knew that I had a lot of trouble opening my heart. I was an actor and I couldn't do it. What kind of, you know, how could I be the next Marlon Brando if I couldn't show my vulnerability? And so I knew I had acquired a problem. I didn't know where it came from at the time, and really didn't know my ass from a hole in the ground at the time. But my mission was to figure out how to open my heart. And that's how I got to where I am. That, long story short, you know, and what I understand about the world now has come from this opening. And you know, why is it so important, David? Why do people need to understand that these things that we've built over our hearts, you know, it's part of the conditioning, right? That's what the trauma is about. If you can guard your heart, then you're cut off from a lot of things. Can you talk about that?
They want you in the head and they want you in the gut. They want you in your low vibration emotion, and they want you in mental processes, 5 sense mental processes. They don't want you here, because this is the connection out into the great beyond. Once you open that, everything starts to change. You start to see things you couldn't see before. You start to see how things connect rather than things that seem to be individually random. This sees random. This sees holes. This sees dots. This sees pictures. And if they can pull you out of the heart into the head and the gut, they got you. Because then you look at most people, they are driven not by their intuition, which comes from here. When people say I'm thinking, what do? They go, I'm thinking. When people say I know, I just know, what do? I know, I just know, because they're instinctively going to that place that it's coming from. And when people say they intuitively know something, that intuitive knowing doesn't come as a process of thoughts leading to a conclusion. The conclusion comes first. It comes as a whole. I just know, because you are tapping into that level of awareness that does know. Where we are in a world manipulated to be, so it doesn't know. And if it doesn't know, it's got to try and work it out, even if it bothers to. So you have the process of thought, trying to work it out, what's going on, what's happening. And then you've got here, which is all where the fear and anxiety comes from, which is a low vibrational state that holds you in a low vibrational state, which holds you in this trap, this simulated multi-level bubble. And they got you. But when you open this, you start to know things, literally know things that come whole. I can see it now. I can see how that works. Like I said earlier, I started after about 2 years into this, getting this knowing of what was going on. And then the names, dates, places, information come for the benefit of the head and the gut, particularly the head, to show me that actually that's exactly what's going on. But it comes.
And then how many times have you said, I knew it? I knew, because you did know it, right? It's incredible process that happens.
I'll tell you a quick story. Just after the turn of the millennium, from here, one day, I got, this is a simulation, and the limit of the simulation in our reality, the human reality, is the speed of light. Just got it. And I started talking about it and writing about it. And then as the years passed, first of all, more and more mainstream scientists were starting to say, well, actually, it does look like we could live in a simulation. And when you realize we do, so many mysteries of reality just disappear once you realize that. And then in April, I think it was 2021, there was an article in Scientific American by an academic who said that he concluded that we live in a simulation, and the limit of the simulation is the speed of light. Which
makes sense.
Caught my interest very quickly. And anyway, what he was saying, because what I've been saying over the years is the laws of physics, as we call them, are actually the rules written into the simulation,
right?
The limitation rules. So when people have near-death experiences and they leave the body, they experience a very different reality, a very different law of physics, if you like.
That's right. That's why they're not actually laws, but I don't, we like to call things laws.
Laws, but they're written into the
yes.
So this guy mentioned that in this article, and he thought that was the case. But then he said he related the speed of light, which is not the fastest speed possible, to processing speed. And he was saying that you can write the laws or the rules of the game, if you like, the limits of the simulation, what is possible and not possible, without being overridden by consciousness, that is. But you're still going to be limited by your processing speed, and your processing speed is the speed of light. So it seems in many and various ways in the reality we're experiencing that the speed of light is the fastest speed, because it's the simulation speed. But when you go beyond it, and indeed you can do things in this world that show you that the speed of light is not the fastest speed of anything.
I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with my skeptic friends and, people who are in my life who I have great respect for and love, who are, they just want to, I'm trying to explain to them how when a civilization gets to a certain point, technology is assisted by consciousness in every way, that we know this from some of the UFOs that we've recovered. We know how they work, or at least we figured it out, but we couldn't figure out how they worked to begin with, because we couldn't find the part where you control them with your your paws, your hands, because they don't work like that. But consciousness assisted technology is what allows these civilizations to, I mean, if they had to travel the speed of light, I can see why people have a real hard time reconciling, how they would get here at the speed of light. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. But it's ironic to me, but not surprising, that those people who I have the same discussion with, they're the biggest materialist skeptics that I know, and they can't reconcile the fact that the speed of light is just that. It's the speed of light, but it is not the fastest way that we can travel, and that we will travel in this light. So it's just like, those are the people who are most plugged into their senses, and they're the ones who have the most trouble understanding that this is such a limited slice of reality.
Yeah, and if you look at those that qualify for these academic scientist areas that basically present human society with, this is how it is, and this is what's possible, and this is what not possible, they're overwhelmingly dominated by five sense prisoners.
Mm-hmm.
And everything has to come through the five senses. I watch, you must too, I watch sometimes scientists talking about what they believe to be science and how things are, and you're shaking your bloody head. They'll might say things like, well, that's not possible. Like, for instance, when people say they see UFOs or whatever appearing out of nowhere and then disappearing into nowhere. Well, of course, the five sense scientist says that's not possible.
Right.
So I'm a scientist, so I know what I'm doing. So you've got to believe that.
Or they say there has to be an explanation in the physical,
Well, it's very simple. We, the observer, can only see a tiny band of frequency. When something enters that band of frequency, it appears to manifest out of nowhere. When it leaves the band of frequency, it appears to disappear into nowhere. But it hasn't disappeared. It's just left the frequency.
That's right.
You can perceive. But it is hard. See, I left school at 15 to play football. I never took a major exam in my life. And I'm looking at these scientists with endless letters after their name, and I'm shaking my bloody head at the ridiculous inability to see the obvious. But there's two things to that. One, if they did see the obvious, they wouldn't be scientists for very long in the mainstream.
That's right.
So there's an incentive to not.
That's right.
But the other thing is they are so programmed to believe in materialism and the solidity of everything and the apartness of everything, that they can't literally possibly compute the idea that some of this so-called paranormal is possible, because they can't perceive how it's possible. And they call it the paranormal. There's nothing para about it. It's perfectly normal.
Right.
But what is normal? Normal is only what we normally experience. And within this reality, with its laws of physics, we only normally experience certain things. And if you only normally experience CNN, you'll have a certain view of the world.
That's right.
But if you normally experience something much more expanded, hardly possible not to be, then you'll have a different perception, because you have a different normal. And when people say it's not normal, it means it's not normal to me.
Right.
But it's perfectly normal. I mean, the ancients and the people with expanded awareness, the paranormal is perfectly normal. It happens all the time. People say, well, how is it possible for me to, or if someone says, I've heard it said many, many times, that you were thinking of someone,
right,
and then the phone rang and that someone was there. And what a scientist would say is it's just a coincidence.
Right, it's a coincidence.
And it doesn't matter how many people have that same coincidence.
No. Talk about conspiracies.
They literally cannot explain it, because they don't understand how reality works. You see, we come back to this again. if you have this cult and it's trying to keep from the population how reality works because it has to mass control, you don't want your people in the human world in the form of academics, teachers, and doctors, and whatever your scientists, telling the people what you don't want them to know. So what you can do, therefore, is appoint people who know what you know, but don't tell the population. Now, that ain't probably going to last very long, is it? So you have a few people in there that know what you know, but don't want the people to know because they're actively working for you. But the vast majority of them, they're telling the people what this cult wants them to believe because they believe it too.
That's right. They have no idea.
They've no idea. And the example I've just mentioned, when we think, we generate frequency. When we feel emotion, we generate frequency, and it's That's unique right. to us. So when and we have this field, this like Wi-Fi field that connects everything, and through the field, these frequencies flow.
That's right.
So my brother said that he had someone in his mind, and then immediately the person called, and there it was. And the point is, oh, I was just thinking of you. Well, why were you thinking of them?
Yeah.
Because they were about to call you and they were thinking of you.
Right.
So this connection happens, especially people that are very close and their frequencies.
Yes.
And therefore, oh, I'm going to ring so-and-so. And so-and-so thinks, oh, I don't
know. I was just thinking of you.
Something to my mind. And then the phone rings. Oh, I'm just thinking of you. That's paranormal. That is. No, it's not paranormal. But this is. It all comes back in the end. So you've got to keep from the population what
that's right.
Was. And that's the power dynamic that allows the few to control the many.
It's very well put. And I know that, one day soon, I hope, because there's so much technology that is being suppressed and hidden for monetary and power reasons, that soon enough people will be able to see, quote, scientifically, just how that is and how it's, how it is actually measurable, how our thoughts don't stay in our head, but they literally leave and they enter the ether, if you will. I know that word is not very popular in the scientific community, but for lack of a better term, there is an interconnectedness to all things. We know now there's a biofield that used to be considered pseudoscience, right? The whole notion of a biofield was considered pseudoscience. Well, it turns out that the biofield is very present and very measurable. So we know that now, but science will catch up with what, the ancient, some of the metaphysical truths that we have come to understand, and that have been lost not by accident over the years.
Absolutely by design.
By design.
Purpose. Because, what this cult has been doing is it's been on a process of squeezing and squeezing, deleting and deleting in the public arena what the ancients knew. Mm-hmm. So you had the shaman in the village, and the people in the village would know what the shaman knew because there was an interaction. So when I talked to Credo Mutra, the Zulu shaman, who was a great friend of mine, and he said that when the British Empire came into Africa, through people like Cecil Rhodes, a Rothschild frontman, they milked the minds of, this was his words, they milked the minds of the shaman and then killed them because they didn't want that knowledge circulating. So what they did then, where they took the knowledge, obviously, a lot of it that are already known, but then they made sure it wasn't circulating in the community anymore. And they did that by introducing science. And the science is based on what? Was based on what? You mentioned it already, the Darwin belief system. This is where most scientists are coming from, even today. And I've done this in the books, when you start to research the Darwin family and related people and networks, they came from a level of awareness that knew that Darwinism was nonsense.
That's right.
But they had to sell it to the people because Darwinism is a 5 sense philosophy of
That's right.
science. So that's why it was done, because they wanted to eliminate consciousness. Now, this is an interesting point. I did a video, you see on my website, it was a few weeks ago now, on this guy, Harari, this Israeli professor chap who claims to be an historian, Yuval Noah Harari. And he is an associate of Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum.
I think I've seen him talk. Yeah.
Yeah. And what he's saying is basically that technology is the new God, the cloud, as he calls it, the cloud that these people talk about, like Ray Kurzweil, which is what is the cloud that they're generating? This technologically generated electromagnetic field, this gigantic global Wi-Fi field, if you like. It's overriding, it's overlaying the field that we would normally interact with. And so it is creating another fake reality, another layer of the fake reality, what they call the smart grid. And the whole point of this technology is to override normal reality, as you might call it, the reality that we've been used to, with these fields of electromagnetically or technologically generated electromagnetic fields that they tune us into. So that becomes our mission control, not out there into infinity, but this cloud, this technologically generated cloud, becomes our mission control, and then feeds us our sense of reality in like a hive mind. This is why they want to connect the brain to artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence then becomes the human mind, and they have overridden expanded levels of consciousness to permanently hold people in the 5 senses.
That's why they're giving out cell phones in third world countries, and they need people plugged in. You know, that is their only way to control them.
That's what they're doing. And you know, I see this this kind of celebrity guy, Elon Musk, but you look at what he's doing in his various companies, and he's fulfilling every single aspect of what is necessary, virtually every single aspect of what is necessary to generate this technological sub-reality. So it's in the end, everything, it doesn't matter what you're looking at, it's all focused on disconnecting people from expanded states of awareness and holding them only in a 5 sense state of perception and sense of the possible. One of the other great things that happens with this postage stamp consensus is they squeeze the sense of the possible. Because then when people like me and you and others, they come out and they say, this is how they're doing it. This is how they're doing this, doing that, manipulating you. And if it's outside, which is not difficult, the sense of the possible that people have been programmed to believe in, then they'll just wave their hands. That's not possible. That's ridiculous. That's crazy. What are you talking about? That's not possible. You can't do that. No, what you believe and what's happening are not necessarily the same thing.
That's for sure. Oh, I've heard some people say, if that was true, there's no way they could hide it. And I'm like, what? What? They can't imagine. And on one hand, part of me is like that, you know, part of them is innocent, but part of them is naive. And so that's dangerous. You know, it's unfortunately, that's the reason why we've been headed in the direction we're headed. And, you know, I'm hoping enough of us come around in time to pull the jet up out of the nosedive, because it can't be sustained, as well as better than I do that.
Yeah, and there's also an instinct in many people that they don't want to face what's happening because they don't want to.
Yes.
This is why it's so easy, and this is how this cult works through its politicians and people. It's so easy to tell people what they want to hear because the door's swinging open already to receive it. But when you're telling people what they don't want to hear, it's a very different game. It's a very different situation because you're pushing against a closed door. They do not want this to be true because, first of all, it rewrites their entire worldview. But also they're frightened that this is what's going on. So that's a reaction as well. That
very true.
Stops people.
That's how politicians. I mean, it's like everyone has amnesia every 2-4 years here in this country. It's like, wait, they just said that. The last guy just said that. The guy before that just said that. They don't do it. They never do it. They can't do it. They don't even have the power to do it. You know what I mean? But people hear what they want to hear, and they have hope.
Yeah, I say to people, do you know everything? They say, well, no one knows everything. So then I say, well, what don't you know? Well, I don't know. I don't know. How can I know what
That's right.
Okay. So why are you dismissing things then by reflex action? You don't know what you don't know. I mean, it's back to Socrates. Wisdom is knowing how little we know. It doesn't matter how much you think you know. One thing you know for sure, there's always more to know. And that keeps your mind open. It keeps you open to all possibility and doesn't shut it off and turn you into a press enter human being.
Yes. So vital. I know that we're running out of time, but I want to ask you one last question, David. I love this question. I talk a lot about programs, computer programs and human programming. And people are coming to terms with the fact that we are all programmed. It is an inevitable part of having a human experience is, you're going to be brought up and raised by somebody, whether that be your parents or a guardian, and you're going to inherit programming from them. And that program is going to affect the way you see the world, and so I know one of my inspirations for having this podcast was to try to inject some programming that was going to be more beneficial for my human family. And, I wanted to ask you if you could, in a sentence or two, give people some code that they could put into their software, that would help them understand and see this reality more for what it is, and also give them give us a greater chance at an existence that matches the beauty of this planet. What would you give them?
Well, I first tell them that the whole of history shows us that authority lies. It's what it does. Whenever official history has been dissected with the passage of what we call time, it's been shown in large part or even in totality to have been total nonsense, total lies. So authority lies, that's what it does. And it lies because it can't tell you the truth. Otherwise, you'd realize what it's doing. So the first response to any authority, I don't care what form it takes, when they tell you something has happened, they'll tell you why it's happened, they tell you what you must believe about what's happened, it's to stop immediately and ask a simple question. Who benefits from me believing what they want me to believe, and thus responding the way they want me to respond? And if the answer to who benefits is anyone that wants to centralize power and reduce your freedom, then it's time to refuse, A, to believe it, A, to or B, to respond in the way they want you to it, and to in any way cooperate with what they're doing. And it's a simple thing. There's 8 billion people, it's reckon, on the planet now, basically, and yet the number of people in full knowledge who are driving the direction of society is tiny. And it's tiny, and you would think that would make it impossible, and it should be. The only way a tiny few could control 8 billion and direct the world and the lives of 8 billion, if 8 billion acquiesce to what the few tell them and want them to do. Okay, how many people wanted to lock down? How many people want to have their life transformed by the hoax of human cause science, of which is nonsense? How many people want their energy bills to go through the roof because of human caused climate change responses and what's happening in Ukraine? How many people in the world wanted to invade Iraq for weapons of mass destruction that weren't there? Right. On and on and on it goes. How many people want the southern border of the United States now to be wide open?
Right.
And the answer is the population doesn't. Population doesn't want it. The population in general doesn't want the sexualization of small children in schools. Right. It doesn't want the drag queens coming into schools to confuse their perception of gender for a much bigger agenda. Mm-hmm. And if you want to confuse gender, then what better way than a bloke with a beard with a dress on?
Right.
And how many people want any of these things? The vast majority of the population don't want them.
Right.
So the next question to ask is, why are we having them? Why are we having them? Because a few people are making it happen.
That's right.
When the vast majority don't want it to happen. That's in itself evidence and confirmation.
And they want us to fight over it, because if we're fighting over that nonsense, then we're not looking at what they're doing. We're not paying any attention to the important things.
Well, I'll give you an example from the last few days. We've got obviously a very famous writer in this country called J.R. Rowling. Mm-hmm. Harry Potter books. J.K. Rowling.
J.K. Rowling, yeah.
J.K. Rowling. And she's done a lot of good work pushing back on the transgender activists' imposition on women's sport, women's privacy, etc. And that's good, and she's taken a lot of flack for it. But when Alex Jones had a more than $1 billion in the end award against him, which was designed purely to destroy him,
of course,
then she came out saying it wasn't enough. It should have been more.
What she did?
Yeah. So,
my God.
So what you're looking at there, you see, is someone who is obsessed with a dot, and that's fair enough, but can't see how the dots connect. They can't see that her demand for freedom of speech to talk about the effect of transgenderism on women actually connects into Alex Jones's right to have his opinion, even if you don't agree with it,
and even if he's wrong.
Yeah. I mean, that's another point, and it goes into all this a whole misinformation, and again the irony, because everything's inverted. It's the liars that go on about having to stop misinformation, but that's a crucial point you raise there. The right to be wrong is fundamental to human freedom, indeed all freedom, because if you don't have the right to be wrong, then someone is appointed to decide what is right and what is wrong. And that's when you have the situation we have now with people who are speaking blatantly obvious truths being deleted for misinformation, that being another way of saying something we don't want people to hear.
Right.
The the right to be wrong is fundamental, because while people have the right to be wrong, there's no authority saying, well, this is right and this is wrong, so you can say this, but you can't say that. And this is another part of it too, is this this focus on being offended. The whole woke mentality is about being offended, and it's offensive. Well, I've never been offended. I don't know what it feels like to be offended, because either, you know, if someone's saying something about you, then they've a right to their opinion, and
right.
you have a right to not let it affect you. But this offensive stuff is purely there not to stop people being offended, because we don't want to upset anybody. No, actually, you do want to upset people.
That's right.
That's why you want people to be offended, because then two things. One, you started to get an excuse for introducing laws that say what you can and cannot say, because you don't want to offend people being offended. But secondly, people being encouraged to be offended creates the divide and rule.
That's right.
Say that. So the system that wants to silence people is then supported by large numbers of people that want to silence people on behalf of the state, although they don't realize that.
No, they don't realize it.
Because they have a different opinion to them. And it's another thing about being conscious and being in a more expanded state, is to realize that in the infinity of forever, when we know so little of what there is to know here, then how can you start being arbitrary about what's right and what's wrong? You have no idea what's right and wrong. You only have a perception of it, probably given to you by someone else, including, you know, overwhelmingly the state. So it's like, okay, you've said something I don't like, fine. And I'll tell you, if I need to feel the need to, I'll tell you why I don't like it. I'll tell you why I think you're wrong. But what I'm not going to do ever is say you can't say it. Because if you can't say what you're saying to me, that sets the precedent for me not being able to say what I want to say to someone else. I mean, if we reach a point of spiritual adulthood, then people say what they want, and and people respond to it, whether they agree with it or they don't agree with it, and then that's the end of it.
That's right.
Once you go into this realm of being offended, well, that's another point. Okay, I'm offended.
Right.
You know,
it's a choice. It's a choice.
You're offended.
Right.
You abuse me. I'm not offended. So again, it's not what people say about us. It's our response to what people say about us that actually decides whether we're affected by it or not.
That's right.
So I've had 32 years of absolute abuse, all over the place, and I've never been offended. And I've never once said, this person must be stopped from saying this about me. Because, you know, if people have an opinion about you, well, that's their right. And if anyone believes it without question, well, you know, that's their problem. You know, they're obviously not ready to become adults. So, you know, say what you like, and I'll just let it go, because I'm not going to go around defending myself from these.
No, that you would have been busy doing that the whole time if you had to.
You're so busy defending yourself that you never actually do anything. And
right.
I've always had this philosophy: boom, 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 boom. Just keep going. And all the way through my life, I've had people abusing me and trying to bring me down and trying to discredit me and all this stuff. And then they come and they have a go, and boom, boom, boom. And they go, and other people come in and they have a go for a bit, boom, boom, but they go, and so it goes on, you know.
Yeah.
But if you're offended and you let it get to you, then they're achieving their end, which is not the idea.
Absolutely. I'm so grateful for your time, David. I you know, as I said to you when I emailed you, I'm a big fan of yours. I have the utmost respect for what you've done. I continue to read your work, and this has been an absolute joy talking to you. And I'm grateful for your time. So thank you so much for coming on my show and talking to me and sharing some incredible wisdom and insight. I appreciate it. Maybe one day we can do it again. And because there's just so much to talk about, and I enjoyed myself so much.
Thanks very much, mate. It's been a real pleasure. I love talking about these areas we've been going into. It's
absolutely. Thank you. And well, you take care, and we'll be in touch with the information about the premiere and all that.
Cheers, mate. Bye.
Thank you, my friend. Take care.